Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Tennis Parents Community. This session is being recorded, so if anybody doesn't feel comfortable with that, do feel free to leave for now and then watch the recording. I'm really delighted to welcome to the group tonight Suzanne Williams. I first met Suzanne through my work for Avon County, where I'm the workforce lead, and Suzanne came to do a fantastic CPD for our coaches. And it was called Never Waste a Warm-Up, which was very intriguing. I think everybody who attended found it super insightful. And I remember all the coaches that were listening adjusting their own posture as Suzanne spoke about the damage that tennis can do to you. Suzanne is a level 5 performance tennis coach. She's a UKSCA accredited strength and conditioning coach. She's got a BSc honours degree in sports science, and she's also an LTA Coach Developer. So Suzanne runs the athletic development gym at the Parklangley Club in Beckenham in Kent, and she supports tennis players of all ages and stages in their strength and conditioning development. Suzanne was Emma Raducanu's original strength and conditioning coach from the age of 7 to 11 years. So really big thank you for joining us, and welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you very much. Pleasure. Lovely to be here. Lovely to be part of a group that's really interested in the development of their players. So it's lovely. Thank you.
It's really kind of you to give up your time, and just so everybody knows, you know, we don't pay people who come on our group anything to do this, so we do super appreciate it when they give up their time for us. As I said earlier, if you want to put anything in the chat during the conversation, please do. If you want to raise your hand and interrupt, please do. Suzanne welcomes questions at any stage, even when she's presenting. Happy to have a two-way conversation. So perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about your own childhood, Suzanne, and how your parents supported you in sport.
I'm the youngest of 3. I've got 2 older brothers. My mum wasn't sporty at all. My dad, before any of us were born, was a pro footballer, actually, in Wales. And pro football then wasn't as it is now. So he ended up, getting a real job. But he had this real interest in sport, and my mum is a huge tennis fan, but not a particularly strong player. And so my eldest brother went into rugby, my middle brother went into football, and I just found tennis probably quite late, relatively, at about age 11. I'd been playing loads of other sports through school, and then when I went to secondary school, it was my PE teacher, actually, who said, you know what, you're not bad at tennis, come and join our club. And that's how it started. And then I guess I ended up sort of doing quite well quite quickly, and representing Wales and sort of playing nationally as a junior, and then off to uni and did sports science and carried on playing then.
That's amazing and fantastic to represent your country. I mean, that must feel very special. And how did your tennis career then lead you into strength and conditioning, or was it the other way around? Your career, how did that unfold?
So I did sports science, and I was coaching tennis to sort of fund my social life in uni. And then when I left uni, there was a job that came up at Parklangley coaching tennis, and I actually said to my parents, I'm gonna do that until I get a real job. And I'm still at Parklangley, and that was in September 96. And what happened was I went through my coaching qualifications fairly quickly, but quite early on I realized that the things that I was finding as a tennis coach, and the technical stuff that I was trying to get the players to do, they couldn't do it because of physical limitations and physical sort of blockages. So when I then used my sort of sports science knowledge and helped them on the physical side of things, it made a big difference to their ability to do the technical things, and obviously subsequently the tactical things. So then I also went down sort of education of the S&C. So I've probably been doing the coaching and the S&C concurrently for about 25 years. And when I'm working in the gym with players, I still think that I'm coaching tennis, because to me it's so linked. You can't have one without the other.
It's really interesting taking that holistic approach, and something that perhaps is becoming more and more relevant. In the past, perhaps not something we thought about so much. And I know a lot of parents on the group have asked even what strength and conditioning is. So there's still a little way to go with that. But I'm sure you've helped many players over the years. But famously, you were Emma Raducanu's strength and conditioning coach. At a young age. It must have felt very special to see the success she had in winning the US Open.
It was incredible. It was, it's, although we keep an eye on her progress, and she was playing junior Grand Slams and all those sorts of things, it's still, you don't expect to see them actually win a Grand Slam, especially at that age. So that was amazing. We had this wonderful watch party at the club where we had hundreds of people coming along, and then she popped down a couple of weeks after that, and it was lovely, really, really exciting.
Well,
So,
fingers crossed she can go on to recreate some of that success. I mean, we can't take anything away from her, but it would be nice to see her settle a bit and start to find her way back to the top.
That would be lovely. 3 ops later, let's see.
Yes, no, absolutely. What a tough life as a young player, and in fact getting used to even being on the tour, because she hadn't really had time to do that even, had she, when she was...
No, her body was nowhere near ready for the rigors of that.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, a lot of parents listening and on the group have children playing tennis but don't know much about strength and conditioning, I don't think. And we had lots of questions from parents asking how it helps with their tennis development, how it helps with injury prevention and also rehabilitation. So perhaps the best thing to do is, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen and showing us your presentation and explaining some of these concepts to people. Is that possible? Yeah,
of course, happily. Just a bit of background. This was the part of the presentation I did with some coaches recently, a few times, including with Kay's groups. So it's not the whole picture, it's just some of it, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of an idea and steer you towards some questions that you may have. But it's just a snapshot, and then we can take it from there. Let me just see. Kay, let me know that this has come up the way we wanted to.
Yes, I can see that, and perhaps anyone can give a thumbs up to make sure that other people can too, if they know how to use Zoom.
Well, good.
Okay.
So
please do say in the chat if you can't see the presentation. We'll assume you can.
Perfect. Okay. Because I can only see 3 people now. So if any hands are up, you're gonna need to let me know.
We've got a thumbs up, so we're all good.
Perfect. So this one specifically was about warm-ups, but we could be talking about coaching females, we could be talking about recovery strategies, we could be talking about training speed or agility, but this one specifically was about warm-ups. And so I'll go through. So thank you for the introduction. I didn't know that I was going to get that lovely introduction, so that's just a little bit of extra information. But the part here at the bottom, actually, where it says roles and it says resource development, for the bits that I've only talked a little bit about, I've actually developed an online resource called the Tennis Fitness Course that people can just check out and get a bit more information. It's a bit sciencey. I'm not at my most exciting when I'm reading it through, but still it's information that you might find useful. So the plan for this session is for me to just give you an overview of S&C for tennis, hopefully reveal some hidden physical issues that maybe you weren't aware of and can keep you informed with sort of future decisions. And then have a look at optimal warm-up protocols. I'm not going to run around in the room here and actually show you the exercises, but there's a protocol and a methodology with optimal warming up that we can go through that. Again, the details are in that resource, and then Q&A. But as Kay said, if you have particular questions as we go along, then just, it's fairly fluid, let me know, and we can see where we go with it. So, so what is the purpose of S&C, and what even is S&C? Because I acknowledge it is the current buzzword. Everyone's talking about strength and conditioning. It used to be called fitness training, and then it became sort of physical training, and now all of a sudden everyone is talking about strength and conditioning. So what lots of people think about when we talk about strength and conditioning is just think of it in terms of fitness training, but what people often think about are these physical components here. So this list here of physical components is the list for all of sports science. I haven't specifically chosen these ones specific for tennis, but as you look at them, you'll probably realize that actually tennis is really physically demanding, because there isn't one in there that isn't relevant for tennis. So you might find that you sort of saying to your coach of your child, you know, she needs to be a little bit quicker, can she change direction better, all those sorts of things that come under the speed and agility, but then of course the stamina and flexibility. And that's the language that we often talk in when we're talking about strength and conditioning. But we're going to delve a little bit deeper, because then we're going to look at skills. So not just physical components, but skills. And these 3 rows, the first row, these are locomotor skills. So that's your ability to travel from A to B in whichever fashion. The second row, non-locomotor, where you stay where you are, but you have to sort of use your spine to twist around, or you're just on the spot moving around in some way. And then the third one is called manipulative, where you use another object to manipulate a ball or something like that. So for example, tennis racket to hit a ball. But again, with the motor skills, you look at those and think, yeah, they're really very relevant to tennis still. So we're starting to build a picture of why tennis is probably one of the most physically demanding sport. And then the last one, which we all talk about, is the tennis specific movement training. And with this one, it depends who you ask, but often if I ask a tennis coach who is responsible for tennis specific movement training of the players that they're working with, then they say the S&C coach or the fitness trainer. And whereas if I ask the fitness trainer, they say, oh, that's the tennis coach. So ideally, both parties would be involved. Of course, there's a third party here. It's the parent, isn't it? The parent doing all the extra stuff that the other 2 pros aren't doing. So in usual circumstances, when we look at that list, if your child has all of those things taken care of, then very typically we think, great, we're sorted. But this is where we come on to the hidden issues that I really want you to know, because it is a game changer. So we're not sorted. Even if we have all of those things sorted, we are not sorted. So I want to come on to this sort of area of life that we're dealing with at the moment, and that is that we have a common enemy to our master plan here, and that is schools and screens. And especially after lockdown, we're getting this particular posture that associated with, you know, schoolwork, laptop screens, sitting down, watching telly, sitting in the car, traveling between tournaments, all these sorts of things, where we have this particular posture that we can imagine. And I actually call it eye posture because it's iPhones. But the thing that we often don't realize is that the very act of playing tennis adds to the same postural problems. So that's the part that I want to get across today, is that we have a significant issue with postural issues with our kids because of screens, but tennis is adding to the same problem. Okay, so we end up having the scoreboard looking like school screens and tennis are just taking over functional correctness. And often the end result is injury. And I'm sure that everyone on the call or watching this back has at some point had their child taken off tennis for a few days because of an injury. But that's not our biggest problem, because in many ways, when there is an injury in place and there's pain and they have to come off the court, we know what happens, we know what it is, and we pass the player on to GP or physio or whatever it is. They have a rest, everything passes, and then they go back on the court. But so if you consider the injuries this end of the spectrum, there's some stuff that's happening in the middle part here that is the real danger area. And a few things came up on the Facebook group, actually, when someone was talking about it. And that is that essentially this is, I've written this is our athlete because I've picked this slide from somewhere else, but essentially this is your child because your child plays a lot of tennis. And I'm going to talk through them individually. So you can see there's upper cross there, and then there's lower cross at the bottom. So I'll just start with upper cross. So just to explain, talks about different parts of the body and what happens to the different parts of the body. So facilitated muscles refer to, if you see down the bottom here, the connection between that muscle and the brain is so strong that the muscle often can't switch itself off, and so it's firing the whole time. Okay, it's on, it's overactive, it's too strong, that kind of thing. So typically for tennis, if I move my screen a little bit, because we are here all the time, it's very much a push scenario. The muscles across the front of the chest here, the front of the shoulders, they get worked, they get used over and over and over. And if they don't get loosened off and lengthened out again, the muscles, because they contract to get used, they end up just staying a slight, small amount contracted, so a tiny bit shorter. Not something that you would see particularly, and nothing that would necessarily cause any discomfort or pain, but they just end up being a slight bit shorter, which means that the shoulder just gets pulled forward a tiny amount. It doesn't even have to be as much as I've just shown you. Okay, so it just gets pulled forward. And then we have a domino effect, because when that gets pulled forward, then these muscles up here, the upper traps and the levator scapula, they get overactive and they shorten, which then means that the shoulder's not only forward, it just gets pulled up a little bit. So you just get this tiny bit of a shrug, and there's always one side slightly different to the other. Again, no pain. You wouldn't even know it's happening. And then what happens, because those muscles get pulled into position, pull the skeleton into a certain position, i.e. posture, you have some other muscles which become inhibited. And now inhibited means that that muscle doesn't receive a particularly good signal from the brain. So it can't switch on when it needs to, or if it does switch on, it's not a particularly strong signal, so it can't fire quickly, that kind of thing. So we end up just having then the muscles that don't switch on are the ones deep in the neck, which means the head just gets pulled forwards a little bit. And you'll probably find it when you're driving between all these tournaments around the country, that when you think your head should be resting back on the headrest, actually it's just holding forwards a little bit. So you get short across here and tight across here. The neck then pulls forwards a little bit. And then the final part of this upper cross is that the muscles that stabilize your shoulder blade, your lower traps and your serratus, they don't, so this is your shoulder blades, the muscles that stabilize those, they don't do their job properly, so they don't stabilize the shoulder. Okay, so that is, oh, that's my watch chatting to me. That is upper cross. And then lower cross, it's the same crossover situation. So typically, because it starts in the hip flexor area, I'm going to stand up and for this one, because we are always in a flexed position for tennis, because that's good athletic height. We're in a flexed position, and then we sleep, tuck our legs in, sitting down, watching telly, doing work, always in that flexed position in the hip. Then the hip flexor muscle, which attaches to the thigh bone and goes through the pelvis and attaches to the side of the spine, it just gets a little bit shorter, which means it just stays in that slightly flexed as opposed to extended, just a slightly flexed position. So that's the sort of down here, the hip flexor, which then means that the muscles in the lower back become facilitated and switched on the whole time as well. And then the crossover effect is because the pelvis has been pulled out of position a little bit because those tight muscles are just pulling on the pelvis, then the stomach muscles and the glute muscles that are all around the bottom area, they don't get to do their job. So they become inhibited. So that's upper cross and lower cross. So if anyone needs me to just go through that bit again, just pop it in the chat or pop your hand up and say the bit that you're not sure about, because what I want to do is explain the relevance to tennis. Okay,
I'm wondering if a lot of children are going to be waking up tomorrow morning to an examination by their parents. And I also wonder how many of us have started sitting much more correctly in our chairs as we're watching you, Suzanne. But please carry on. This is fascinating.
So the relevance for tennis, aside from if this isn't dealt with, we end up in injury. And somebody mentioned that, you know, their child ended up injured and they had to take time out and do particular shoulder work and things like that. The actual relevance to tennis before injury is, so we end up having a player who has limited neck mobility. There's no pain in their neck, it's just limited neck mobility. So they can't pop their head in various positions that we might want them to easily. It's stressful for their body to do it quickly and easily. And that they have limited range on being able to open through their shoulders, whether that's for, you know, ground strokes or for serves. They have to find a different way to do it because their shoulder is rolled forwards. They can't do it in the most optimal way possible. You often find that the players are out of breath and you're wondering, why are they so out of breath? Because they haven't actually done that much relatively. But the rib cage becomes slightly compressed onto the lungs, and so the lungs can't fill with air. That says shoulders. That's supposed to say hips. I apologize. So here, what we can't then do is full extension into the hips. So, you know, you might find that the coach is saying to you, she can't get up onto her serve properly, or she's not getting up to the high balls. You know, there's a blockage there. There's a limitation in the hips. That's the one I meant to write. Number 4, I apologize, is meant to say if you can't connect to the abdominal muscles, anything overhead in tennis, the primary muscle group, the abdominals. Any rotations, primary muscle groups are abdominals. So it's really important that we can access all these muscles that are supposed to be doing their job. And then often what we end up is having rotator cuff vulnerability. Now, rotator cuff gets spoken about a lot. So essentially, rotator cuff are 4 small muscles around the shoulder that are there to stabilize the shoulder and to rotate this arm bone. They are not there for heavy lifting. They are not the power muscles. They are just stabilizing and rotating muscles. But if the other muscles around, the bigger muscles around, aren't doing their jobs, then the rotator cuff muscles end up doing all the work for them, and it just becomes vulnerable, overused, and ultimately painful. And also it's a limited shoulder stability. So, you know, anything up here, the shot can't be repeated. You can't do the same thing over and over because the shoulder blade's in a different place each time. So if you think of serves, especially maybe second set or to the end of the match, the serves will just start to go because the shoulder blade can't repeat the same action over and over. So consistency goes through the floor and things like that. So upper thoracic, so the sort of top part of your spine, the part that we really need to be able to rotate on itself, that gets limited because of this position here. And so we can't get into the positions we're supposed to for serving, or we can't get enough rotation on our ground strokes. And then when we can't access the muscles, the glutes, so all of sort of the bum muscles, they're basically the powerhouse in the body. They are the muscles responsible for acceleration and deceleration. So they put the brakes on for us. And they're also the muscles responsible for hip rotation. You know, you step out onto a shot. So what we've got is we have a player who, just because of these slight postural changes, and it doesn't have to be extreme, it can be slight postural changes, we have them just compensating all the way through and never quite able to get optimal technique. And tennis is hard enough as it is without being able to just quite get into the shapes that we want them to get into.
Well, Suzanne, when you talk about these limitations, what sort of time period and what sort of age or how long does someone have to have been playing tennis for these things to start manifesting themselves?
Yeah, it's scarily short because they're probably coming into the sport with it, even if they've started really young, because of screens. So because they spend so much time in this sort of space, they've already got it, and then tennis adds to it. So no time at all.
So even if your child isn't playing that much tennis, these things we're learning tonight are relevant to most children, full stop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if they're not playing that much tennis, they'll have this, but it won't affect their life particularly, but it will affect their ability to reach sort of optimal levels of within their tennis capacity. And it just makes tennis harder if you can't quite, I'm not talking about Grand Slams here, but if you can't quite get into the shapes, it's just, everything just feels harder.
And of course, we're all looking for that competitive advantage. By the time they get to be a teenage player, they're probably all of them technically quite sound, if they've been going through any kind of performance program. So at that stage, you're looking for quite small marginal gains, and these are the sorts of areas where we can perhaps start working earlier to try and get those gains coming through later.
Absolutely. So tennis is so highly skill based as a sport. You can get pretty far on skill, but if there haven't been the physical interventions, it always catches up with you. It just always does. And it typically ends up catching up in those mid-teen years, sort of 14, 15. And the players who started strength and conditioning earlier on, it shows. A, because they're on the court longer because they have fewer injuries, and B, because they're just more consistent and they're more in tune with their body. They understand their body better because of all the extra work that they've done to understand their body and to train their body. It always catches up with you. You can't hide away because it's so skill based and it's so physical. You can't get away with only having one. So when it comes back to what is the purpose of S&C, well, number one is keep the player injury free, because tennis is the main event. You know, the whole point of everything that we're here for is just to help them get as good as they can at tennis. And the only time they can get better at tennis is when they're on the tennis court. So if they're injury free, they get more time to be on the tennis court. And then the second one is really about helping them have good posture without these imbalances, so that they are giving themselves half a chance to be able to perform the right technique. And then finally, the purpose of S&C is really about the speed and agility and the changes of direction and the power and all that. That's the third one. You know, everybody thinks it's all about that. It can't be about that. You can't put, sorry, that's my dog shaking. You can't put form or strength on dysfunction. So we have to keep them functionally correct. And that's where fitness training or doing the right exercises, I call it strength and conditioning, but, you know, doing enough of the right exercises to keep the body balanced. And it's always a balance of strength and flexibility. Those are the two things, because they work in opposites in the body, which I can come back to if you want me to. And then the question is, what can we do about it? Well, we can never waste a warm-up. So quickly running through, I personally don't love the term warm-up because it sounds really temporary to me, and it makes it sound like it's just about what's coming next. But actually done properly, it can be transformational. It can make changes, these changes that we're talking about, these postural changes in the body, but it can also make changes to strength and stamina and all those sorts of things as well. So it can be transformational if done properly. So we'll just scrub that out the way because we don't like that term. At the very least, it's performance preparation. And then there is a protocol or a method called the RAMP method, which involves 4 different phases: raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate. And there are different types of exercises that you would do in each phase. This is detailed way more with examples of what exercises to do in the tennis fitness course. But also you can look it up online and that kind of stuff. It's not, I haven't made this up. This is sports science talking about the RAMP methodology. So really quickly, the type of exercises that you would do in raise are there to raise the heart rate, the body temperature, all the things that you would expect it to do. You could do all of those things by just having your child run around the court, but you're wasting a massive opportunity, because that is the time for them to learn key movement patterns. So the key movement patterns for tennis are running, side steps, cross steps, so that's crossovers, cross unders, backwards, running, and hopping. Those are the key things that the child should really be able to proficiently do. So your raise time is when they should be taking the time to do that. And then we've got activate. So activate, if you think of activate as strengthening, so coming back to the upper cross and lower cross, it's about activating the muscle, connecting the muscle to the brain. So the muscle knows its job. It knows that it's supposed to switch on at certain times. And if you do certain exercises in the activate phase that make sure it switches on, then it learns its job and it knows to switch on while, you know, the rest of the time. So when you're playing tennis or when you're walking down the street, it knows that glutes find out, this is what you want me to do. Okay, I'll switch on. But unless you specifically activate them, once they've become inactive, they won't refine that for themselves. Okay, so here you could be really tennis specific and you could think about all the muscles that you need just for tennis, but I think it's important actually that we think about all the muscles that we need that mean we're able to play tennis. So there's postural muscles as well. If you want me to explain a bit more about neuromuscular stuff and strengthening, let me know a bit later on. And then the next phase is mobilize. So this is where lots of coaches are already doing this with their plays. It's the dynamic stretching kind of thing. So when you come back to the upper cross and lower cross stuff, it's loosening off those tight muscles and allowing range of motion through joints, because tennis is it's a sport that requires outside normal range. So we really need our plays to be able to get into those out of normal ranges without stress, without any difficulty, without it being slowed down because you can't get there, that kind of thing. And then potentiate is it's about really ramping up the intensity, so the player feels that they are physically and mentally ready to fire, at max. So if you think of a sprinter, just before they get down into the blocks, sometimes they do this really high intensity, like tuck jumps. So that would be like a potentiate type activity. Okay, so again, this is, I guess, a bit sort of conceptual at the moment, but I just wanted to give you some information so you can then go and find out a bit more information around it. Because if you didn't know to ask about raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate, then you wouldn't necessarily know where to start.
And a question that we had from one of the parents on the group was, is it possible, or is there such a thing as doing too much warm-up before a match?
I might need a bit more context. I mean, yeah, you can wear yourself out. It's a warm-up, not a wear out. And it's difficult because sometimes you think you're about to go on. That's the joy of tennis and never knowing when you're about to go on. You think you're about to go on, so you start, and then they go to a third set. You're like, well, I may as well just keep going now. And you end up like doing an hour. Yes, that would probably eat into the energy reserves. And it is all relative to how conditioned that player already is. So if they're very conditioned, then they could comfortably do, 20 minutes, go through the raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate, and come off that feeling primed and ready to go. Whereas if they're not conditioned, 20 minutes might feel like they've actually eaten into the reserves a little bit. So it's one of those annoying, it depends, but you learn, and you learn about your body and you learn what feels right, but only through practicing it.
And in terms of ages as well, in relevance to this, so for perhaps a young child just doing mini red, mini orange, are they doing something different, or is this all the same sort of stuff? Same
process through the body.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same all the way through. But that one might be a 8-minute. It might be a 6 to 8 minutes. You do your side steps, your crossovers, you do little bits of skipping, right? Let's mobilize you a little bit, or let's play a game of chase and catch the ball, and there's your potentiate. but you do it every time, partly because it makes a big difference to the body. And actually, then you're not wasting the first, especially if it's a fast fall, you're not wasting the first set warming the body up. You are ready to go. And partly because it switches you on mentally.
And parents could be guiding a child through this at tournaments, but also potentially if they arrive early for a coaching session and maybe the coach isn't quite so invested in this part of the program, or even if you don't want the coach to need to do that and you can crack on then with the stuff that you're paying for in terms of technical development. Yeah,
all of those things. I mean, the coach, there are skills within the warm-up that often need coaching. And if you think about those tennis specific movements in raise, yes, you could do raise by just running around the outside. But if you look at those tennis specific movements, that's when the coach should be saying, right, let's practice your first step, your crossover, into your split step into your crossover. That's a raise activity because it would raise the heart rate, raise the temperature within the body, raise joint lubrication. It does all those things, but it also gives the child a chance to really think about how they're going to time their split step or go for an uneven split step, or how large their first step could be, rather than just assuming that that's taken care of. These things, they're all tennis. Just because there isn't a racket and ball involved, they're all tennis, and it does require coaching and honing of skills. So here I was just going to say, instead of thinking of warm-up as just a warm-up, think of it as actual physical development. I mean, if your child did, this is going to be easy maths for me and this is deliberate, but if your child did 15 minutes of this kind of stuff 4 times a week, it's 50 hours of S&C a week that they weren't doing. And that makes a massive difference to their body. Sometimes I get asked about long-term athlete development. Now, Kay, this wasn't in the thing that we spoke about, but I thought I'd pop it in. So this is a model called the Youth Physical Development Model. It's kind of like part of long-term athlete development, because the thing that is so much different to pro tennis for us is that everybody's body is changing. Whereas by the time they've reached pro tennis, they're adults and their bodies aren't really changing that much, other than adapting to the sport or the training. Here we're talking about with your kids, here we're talking about pre-adolescence, adolescence, puberty, all of the things that change in the body. So just to give you a bit of an idea here, the font size relates to the importance at certain times in a child's chronological, so age development. So for example, when they are, this is for female, by the way, when they are 5, the sports specific skills, the really tennis specific skills, they're not hugely important, because they're 5, you're trying to work on more generic skills. Whereas when they get older, 15, 16, 17, 18 and so on, you really want to get the actual sports specific things absolutely nailed down. But the thing that stands out to me here is every single age group, strength is really important. So it's not the strength that is talking about pushing a car up a hill. It's the strength about neuromuscular connections with the brain, and it's the strength about having enough tension in the muscle to hold the skeleton in the right place and to be able to move and change. Tennis is a relative weight sport. It's their own body weight they have to move. They're not lifting an external weight, it's their own body weight. So to be able to have enough strength to be able to move their body around the court, because you can't be fast unless you're strong, because speed requires strength in the muscle to fire quickly. So I thought I'd pop that one in because that may raise some questions. And how much time to spend on a ramp, it depends on how much time you make available. So for example, if you made 6 minutes available, because by the time they've inhaled their after school snack and they've changed in the car and they've got out of the car and it's 4:54 and they're starting at 5 o'clock, then you might spend 2 minutes doing raise, 2 minutes doing activate exercises, and 2 minutes doing mobilize. But that's still 6 minutes better spent than them just standing at the back of the court watching the previous lesson finish. So that's where I was going with that one, which we can chat about. And then, then it was questions. So I'll come out of the screen share if that works.
Yeah, thank you, Suzanne. That was fascinating. I think that chart blew my mind. I'm going to have to go and take that away and study all the acronyms on there. But we do have some parents' questions that I'd like to put to you. We haven't had anything in the chat, and we haven't had anyone put their hand up. Please do feel free, guys, to do that. But if I rattle through some questions now. One parent, Adam wanted to ask a question, and he's not. Oh, he is on the call. Adam, would you like to ask your question, if you can remember what you wanted to say?
Sure. Thank you very much. It was very informative, more informative than I was expecting for this, but it's really, really good. I think the main question is, now that we know how important it is there, where would you recommend we could look for somebody who could, manage all of this SNC side of a child? Is there
So the child is a good question. The child is an interesting part of it, because many PTs, so personal trainers, may not necessarily have been trained up in coaching children. They're often trained up at age 16 and above, but that doesn't mean they haven't. You could have a PT who has done some extra training, because knowing about the different stages of growth and the relevance, is important. If you went to the UK Strength and Conditioning Association website, which is UKSCA.com, they have a find a coach, just like the LTA have a find a coach option. They have a find a coach, and you can see where you are in your region and things like that. But also, if you went to your local county office, they may well be able to point you in the right direction as well.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thank you. Great question, Adam. Thanks for coming on and asking it. The next question is from Chris Brown, and he asked, what's the best home exercises that under 10s and under 9s can do? And what's the best home equipment to potentially buy? I know we've covered a lot of that in the presentation, but is there anything to add?
You don't need a lot of equipment. You really don't. You could get away with minimal equipment. There aren't any best exercises, because it depends. It depends on your outcome of what you want. If you want agility improvements, then it would be a different type of training program than if you wanted flexibility improvements. Again, there's some stuff in the resource that can give. I've got some home programs written in the resource, but I would always say strength exercises. Now, body weight strength exercises like lunges and hinges and squats and all those sorts of things, and press ups and pull ups, all those sorts of things make a huge difference. And I would always include strength and flexibility. Now, the thing about flexibility is the kids they haven't lost their flexibility yet. It's not really until you hit puberty that you start to lose your flexibility. But it is a skill. Actual flexibility and stretching is a skill that people hate doing. They just hate it. And it's probably one of the most important things, because without being able to get into all of those shapes that we need them to get into, they can't do the technique properly. So if I was choosing two, I would say flexibility and strength.
Fantastic. I know my daughter did a lot of gymnastics at a young age, and they did all of those things for a good hour before they went anywhere near doing the actual, it's probably 50% strength and conditioning and 50% activity. So yeah, anybody who perhaps would like to think about other sports that their children could do where they'll get these things, those are the sorts of things perhaps. And I don't know if you've got any other advice on other sports that also could potentially deliver these things.
Gymnastics is always brilliant. People talk to me about swimming a lot. Now, swimming is lovely because it uses the whole body. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't use ground reaction forces, whereas tennis, you only get to change direction because of pushing into the ground and changing direction. Whereas swimming, you're buoyant, you're floating. So your body doesn't have to experience impact. So in some ways that's good, but in terms of helping a developing body understand how to use the ground to change direction, how to use the ground to push off and that kind of thing, swimming doesn't tick those boxes. But it's fun, and it's a skill to learn. And when we think back to that chart, it's not really about sports specific skills at this point. It's about learning all of the skills. And if we talk about upper cross and lower cross, swimming is great for correcting hip position for lower cross. It's only good for upper cross if you're doing backstroke. If you're doing front crawl or breaststroke, then it actually adds the same problems as tennis and screens.
I've had a question. Thank you for that, Suzanne. I've had a question on the chat, and if the person who asked it wants to speak, please do. But I assume because it came to me directly, perhaps they don't. So I'm going to ask it for them. They were wondering, what about cooling down after a tournament? So exercises for that, and their daughter's 12.
Yes, so recovery exercises are really important. So recovery involves hydration, refueling, things like foam roll exercises, so massage, and stretching. All of those things are really important. Post-puberty, girls absolutely have to do a cool down because their blood pressure drops in a different way to how boys do, so they actually get more benefit from cooling down. And in fact, they must do it because they get a bit more lightheaded and things like that than the boys would. That's post-puberty. But again, it's in the resource, but have a look. Those are the 4 main components, and but hydration and refueling are one of the major components of recovery, as is showering, better than bath. I can come on to ice baths and things like that, but showering is better than bath, and yeah, stretching and massage, because all the tennis that you've just done has exaggerated those problems again. So rather than let them stay tight and short, as soon as you can, release them with massage and stretching, so that you don't get into the upper cross in the first place or the lower cross in the first place.
Thank you. So another question from a parent. This one was from Salma Paruk. Her son struggles with cramping in his calves. He plays about 8 hours of tennis a week. Is this something that's overuse, or could it be growing pains? I realise you're not a medical person at that level, but any comments on cramping generally? Yeah,
cramping is misunderstood, actually. They spend a lot of time on cramping and there's still no real very definitive answers. So there's sort of exercise associated muscle cramps, which is probably what we're talking about, so EAMC, as opposed to just night cramps, you know, when you wake up and your foot's in cramp and it's woken you up. Some evidence suggests that it's dehydration and things like you know, electrolytes and salt deficiency. Some evidence suggests more magnesium and potassium in the diet. Often cramping is because the muscle is overworked relative to how fit the person is. So if the person if he was fitter, stronger, things like that, then the tennis wouldn't have challenged his muscles in the same way as if he isn't as fit and strong. I mean, I don't know him, so I don't know how fit and strong he is, but relatively. And also when we come back to the flexibility and the tightness, flexibility and strength, so they work in opposites in the body. So I don't know if anybody here, if they lie on their front and they try and lift their own heel up by sort of bending their leg, whether they find that their hamstring cramps. And it's not necessarily because the hamstring isn't strong enough to lift the weight of the bottom half of the leg, but because their quad is so tight that the hamstring has to overcome the tightness in the front of the leg, and then that overworks the hamstring. So if there's lots of tightness and not enough flexibility in the body, then that can end up making the muscle feel overworked as well.
Yeah, I mean, we see the players on the pro players cramping, and you know, one wonders what that's about. So it's obviously not an exact science if it's happening at that level. But
it's a bit like stitches; they don't really fully understand them.
No, that's really interesting. And I'm going to just put a few of these questions together. We've had a parent whose 17-year-old son has developed pain in both his elbows, but a lot more on his right, and they're wondering about tennis elbow. But also we've had a parent who's got a daughter who's experiencing mild pain in their upper arm when they're serving, and wondering if they can avoid this. They're going to see a physio about it, but those are sort of those arm injuries, those what's your views on that?
So tennis elbow is normally sort of this side, whereas golfer's elbow is this side. Often it's a tendonitis, but often it comes from postural issues in the shoulder. So although there are pains here which can essentially be released and things like that, it's correcting the postural issues and the strength issues in the shoulder. And with the serving on the daughter, I wonder whether she gets the pain more when she's in this part, so when she's finished the serve and at the end of it, and that the pain is probably coming down here. It's the similar thing. The larger muscles need to do their jobs. The physio will be able to do an assessment which muscles are working properly and which ones aren't. The larger muscles should be doing the work, but possibly the smaller muscles, like the rotator cuff muscles, are having to take the heavy lifting. And it's just too much tension in the muscles and overwork. Difficult to say without seeing, but
no, of course. I've noticed, having attended various physio appointments with my children and having some myself, that over the years it seems now like we're given exercises rather than being given treatment necessarily in a session. So it's more about diagnosis and then exercise to do outside of the surgery rather than actual treatment on the bed at the time.
Yeah. So the only treatment that they could do would be to loosen. Any tightness, that they can loosen it. Like recently I tore muscle here on the forehand, and it was because of tightness through here. So although he loosened the tightness, it's then about strengthening, daily strengthening and daily keeping it loose. Once a fortnight in a physio is not going to touch the sides compared to daily behavior.
So if you want your money's worth out of the physio appointment, really stick to the program that you're given, and don't just it's got better, it's suddenly all better. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. One more question from a parent about yoga, and they were wondering whether a child can attend a yoga class for adults. Is that something at a certain age, or is it just generally fine for children to do the same stuff?
Oh, it's absolutely fine. They can do yoga practically from birth. The instructor may not be insured to cover under 16s, which is obviously a different scenario. But if they were doing yoga at home or anything like that, then absolutely, yeah. So one of the plays that I work with, the whole family, they do yoga every morning for about 45-50 minutes before their day begins, and he is by far the most flexible and most able player.
That's amazing. Do want to come on to asking you about how parents can reach out to you if they want to work with you in any way, and also what you're personally doing. But we had one more question in the chat. Does the person who put it in the chat want to ask it themselves? If they remain silent, I'll ask it for you. But if you want to ask it yourself, come off mute if you would. Okay, well, do feel free to chip in if you want to ask it, but I'll ask it on your behalf. So are there any conditioning type exercises that encourage growth in height? And what age would strength exercises be useful, thinking about how it may negatively impact development?
Okay, so they're quite linked, those two. So I'll go to the second one first. Right from the off, strength exercises right from the off, because we can't start to walk as a toddler unless we have enough strength to be able to do it. So right from the off. The negatively impacting development, often that kind of question comes up because there was literally just one very badly designed study which loosely decided that possibly doing some strength exercises could possibly have who knows, damaged some growth plates in some children. There have since been literally thousands of exercises that prove that to be incorrect. And resistance training, which is strength training, resistance training is actually really positive for growth plate development. Height, tricky one. Their height is pretty much predetermined genetically, but you can impact it negatively by not fueling enough and that kind of thing. But their height is pretty much the point at which they're going to have their growth spurt is predetermined. There is a calculation. There is a calculation that you can do where you measure their. So if you want to find out when they're going to have their growth spurt, if you Google what's best, peak height velocity calculation, so PHV calculation, and you basically measure their weight, their standing height, their seating height. You put in their exact age, like 9 years, 4 months, that kind of thing, and and their gender, and it calculates when they're going to hit their growth spurt. But in terms of actually making someone taller or not taller, that's predetermined.
That's really interesting. And my own one of my children, shouldn't be too personal for them now they're grown-ups, and one of my children was very late developer, and I think it probably saved me quite a lot of money in tennis, because they played at a lower level and then grew late and then joined in at that level later. And also I think they probably learnt more techniques for winning points other than just using their height when they were younger, which were quite useful. So it's not something to be too dismayed about, I don't think, if your child doesn't grow. They may not be winning as much when they're younger, but they probably will be learning other things. That was my experience. But
absolutely. And if they're sort of really high level and they go into national academies and things like that, they as far as I'm aware, I think they're still doing it. They'll do the peak height calculation, so they will know if the child is, going to develop later or not, and they will make allowances for that.
That's good to know. Good to hear as well. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much. That's been fascinating. I think it's an area that parents are not always aware of, and sometimes coaches aren't aware of. So thank you so much for explaining strength and conditioning to us and the sorts of things we can be doing. Tell us a bit more about what you're going to be doing next. Are you carrying on the same line? Is this something you're going to continue with? Are you, and how could parents reach out to you if they'd like to work with you or your team?
Yes, I can give my email address. No problem. You've got my email address, haven't you, Casey?
I do, yes.
That's not problem. I mean, my diary is pretty busy. So I run the gym at the club, and I work with however many players, and I've got contact time, and I'm a consultant. I'm writing various resources for the LTA and coach education. So my time, don't have a lot of time, but if you have a specific question, and maybe I can signpost or things like that, because then happy to help.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any other questions for Suzanne before we finish for the evening? You've all remained quiet, which seems to be a theme for these conversations that we have. But I know that lots of people watch these back. So we do record them for that reason. And maybe that puts you off a little bit, but it's a balancing act. Anybody else want to say anything before we say goodbye for the evening?
Oh, we have some.
A quick question from someone saying, what should players do between matches? So if they're coming off and going on again, I suppose it depends what age group, because obviously they have longer matches if they're a bit older, but anything?
Yeah, tricky. I mean, the textbook answer is eat, drink, shower, start your warm up.
Okay.
But you may have 20 minutes, in which case, if you've got time, if you got really sweaty and you got time to change your shirt, happy days. Always drink, always eat, because if your glucose levels in your muscles, your glycogen levels in your muscles drop, that's it. You can't do anything about them until you've slept through. So make sure they are eating and eating all throughout the day, even if they don't fancy it. If it means they have to drink in their energy, then that's fine. So at the very least, eat and drink, and optimally warm up again. But I get it. I sit at these tournaments and you're there for all day, and you don't know when you're going to go on and all those sorts of things. So optimally, even if it's just 10 minutes, you're like, right, I'm on that court next. I'm going to make sure I do a quick raise, quick activate, quick mobilize. It would make all the difference.
Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you so much once again for giving up your time for us. And we've had some thank yous coming in on the chat. And I'll be back in touch with you to let you know about how many people have downloaded the Zoom as well. Oh, one more question, just if we can slip it in. Is there anything in particular you recommend? Oh, so what would you suggest the child eats or drinks? I think that's a whole another Zoom in its own right, but any top tips on that for tennis players?
It is. I mean, I'm not a nutritionist, so my recommendations aren't, held in stone or whatever the saying is. Whatever you can get in them.
Okay.
I mean, there's all sorts of things like milk is really good for hydrating, but often nobody wants milk, even if they've put some chocolate in it, like a Nesquik. Whatever you can get in them to keep their levels up. It is the simple answer. Anything is better than nothing.
Well, I'll go away and do my homework, try and find someone to bring to the group on that specialist topic. But Suzanne Williams, thank you very, very much, and good night, everybody.
Thanks all. I'll stay on for the moment.